Hey, thanks for joining and watching part 2 of our Nautilus 46 Open catamaran review. In this episode, we're going to talk about motoring and sailing, and we hope that regardless of whether or not you're interested in buying a Nautilus or not, you're going to get some information out of this that's going to be useful in your search for your next cruising catamaran. So if you happen to like this video, before you go, if we could please ask you to please hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells. We'd really appreciate it.
And thank you for those who have subscribed to our videos. We love making them, and we're excited when you watch them.
If you haven't already done so, as you watch this video, it'll be a good idea to start writing down a couple things. The first of which is, what are your cruising goals? The second of which is, do you envision being largely single-handed, just you and your spouse sailing, or do you expect to have a full crew generally? Some of the things that you should consider in your cruising goals are, where do you want to sail? Do you think you're going to be crossing oceans? Do you think you're going to be crossing oceans frequently? Are you going to be cruising where it's cold and where it's warm? Additionally, you want to consider the draft of your vessel, not only the water draft, but also your air draft. Wild One has an air draft of 75 feet, which prohibits us from going the entirety of the ICW. That's not a big deal to us, but it's a big deal for some people. So when I mention crew count, I think it's important to think about if whether or not you're going to be sailing the boat exclusively on your own, or you think you're going to have you and your significant other, or are you going to have a full crew? Could Wild One be sailed single-handedly? I think it could be in conjunction with the autopilot for sure. I wouldn't be able to sail it in 30 knots of wind or 40 knots of wind, that's for sure. I wouldn't want to do that anyway. But I think under the right conditions, you could sail Wild One single-handedly. There are some things that would be definitely a challenge, like, for example, coming in and out of a mooring ball, for example, in high winds. I'm not sure how that would happen. Or coming into a marina under high winds, that sort of thing. So, there are definitely some circumstances where I think that you could sail her single-handedly, but otherwise it would be a real challenge. I bet you there are plenty of sailors that can do it. It's just not me. It's important that you start thinking about where you want to be in the comfort versus performance space. Generally speaking, I feel like the larger the boat, the more comfortable it is. I know this is a big generalization and hull shape has a lot to do with it. However, I'd much rather be crossing the Atlantic Ocean in an 80-foot boat than a 30-foot boat. Similarly, I think a 55-foot catamaran is going to be much more comfortable at the same seas than a 40-foot catamaran. Happy wife, happy life is the philosophy that I subscribed to when we were speccing Wild One. Washers, dryers, refrigerators, freezers, generators, solar, batteries, all those things weigh down the boat tremendously. And then you add on top of that, whether or not you are a weekend cruiser or a full-time cruiser, and you add all your personal belongings that you need for those 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 months a year, it really weighs the boat down, and it slows the boat down. Off the top of my head, I think there's about 3 or 4 different types of catamaran steering configurations. Wild One, a Nautilus 46 Open, has 2 outboard helm stations. Our friends of ours have an Atlantic 47 by Chris White, and their helm station is forward the cabin. In addition, there's what's called a bulkhead steering position, and in general it's either at deck level or it is kind of midway between the deck and the cabin top. No matter what your preference is for helm station configuration, I think there are always trade-offs. I know a lot of people poo-poo on the twin outboard helm stations, and the main reason for that is because they are exposed to weather. And yes, that is true. However, for our cruising grounds of the Bahamas and where it's warm, I think I can count on my hand maybe 5 times where the weather has been inclement enough where I just really didn't want to be out there or not. In general, on long passages, we're either lying in the cockpit or hanging out at the nav station inside the cabin, and so we very rarely go outside to the helm stations. The only caveat to that is if we're going out to adjust sails, checking to see how they're trimmed, or we're adjusting engine speed. or just plain look around to make sure we're not going to, run into something. So outside of those 5 times, I haven't regretted those twin outboard helm stations. Now, there are things you can do. I've seen owners, for example, enclose them in vinyl and canvas and that sort of thing, and that's something that we have considered. But at the end of the day, 5 times in 3 years, it just didn't seem like it was that big of a deal to us. The thing that did really attract us to the Nautilus 46 Open is that moving those helm stations outboard really frees up the room in the cockpit. And that is something that really attracted us to the boat. We can have a lot of people on this boat to entertain, and you're not stumbling over one another, and you have plenty of room to spread out. The outboard helm stations also provide very good visibility. And I know you're thinking, okay, you're on the port side, how do you see anything on the starboard? Well, yeah, of course you don't. But then you just walk over and go to the starboard helm station and you have perfect visibility. Now, I know there are challenges associated with that. We only have single engine controls on the starboard side. That is something that we are going to remedy going forward, because obviously we favor starboard ties every time we come into a marina. But that is something that we can fix. The other great thing about the outboard helm stations is it gives you great feel under sail. The steering controlled mechanisms on a non-fly Nautilus 46 Open are really quite simple, and therefore lend themselves to be able to be fixed at sea or while you're in the Bahamas quite simply. It's cable controlled. There are 2 quadrants on each of the rudders, and there's a coupler between the port and the starboard. I think it's important to talk about motoring, because although we do everything possible to choose the right weather windows so that we can sail, that's not always possible. In our most recent passage from Fort Lauderdale to Norfolk, we had to cut into Charleston for weather. We were able to sail mostly from Fort Lauderdale to Charleston, no problem. However, the weather patterns were changing, and if we didn't get out of Charleston, we were going to get stuck there for another week or 2. So we decided to go. Unfortunately, we had to motor most of the way. Wile One has Volvo Penta D260s. The D260s were an option over the D250s or the D255s, I can't remember. In addition, we added Flexofold 1814 props. Overall, I think folding props was a good addition. It gets us about 2 to 4/10 of a knot. I don't have a lot to compare it to, but overall I think the noise levels in the cockpit are a little bit high. I think Nautilus could have done a little bit better job with noise dampening insulation in the engine compartments, and in fact that's one of the things on my long list of improvements for Wile One. At about 1800 RPMs, which is the peak of the fuel efficiency of the D260s, we burn about 0.8 to 1 gallon an hour. Our tankage on Wile One is 79 gallons for each the port and the starboard side. My one complaint with the Nautilus 46 Open is that it only has 79 gallons per haul. I would like to have about 100 gallons per haul, as this would give us about 4 days motoring with 2 engines or 8 days motoring with alternating engines. We're sailing south right now, and we're heading down in the direction of Chub Key. We're in the Berry Islands, and we're in the Northwest Channel Passage. And the seas are extremely flat, obviously, and we've got about 7 to 10 knots of wind, and we're making anywhere from 2.5 to 4.5 knots. It's extremely comfortable. Shereen is over here on her iPad and computer, and I'm sitting here making videos, and obviously these are ideal sailing conditions. But I think this kind of articulates a little bit about just how comfortable and easy this boat is to sail. One of the criteria that I was looking at when we were considering buying a catamaran is I wanted something a little bit higher performance. Now, I'm not saying Nautilus, my Nautilus 46 Open is a high performance boat, and in fact it's really not. But I do find that it is able to kind of do a little bit better than a lot of heavier cruising catamarans. So Nautilus had attempted to make the water surface of the Nautilus 46 Open as minimal as possible. The result of which is that you have much less friction going through the water, or at least that's the goal. And so they have these chined hulls that kind of above the water line spread out so that you have more space down below. I find that's a nice feature. The one caveat to all that is that you cannot load these boats up as much as you would ordinarily like a Leopard or a Lagoon, from what I've understood. Because there is much less water surface area, it obviously has a little less buoyancy, and so you would end up sitting lower in the water. So all lines run back to the cockpit. We got the 3 reefing lines for the mainsail, we got the Solent main sheet, and we have a Gennaker halyard. There's room for one more line if you wanted to run another halyard, for example. I've also heard that some folks have gotten rid of the 3rd reefing line and used that additional block so that you can do a conventional rigging for a Code Zero, for example. On Wile 1, we have the Solent, which is pretty small. I think it's 40 or 50 square meters, if I'm not mistaken. The mainsail is about 75 square meters. And we have a Gennaker that we purchased as an option from Nautatech. It's 95 square meters. We bought an Oxley parasail for our downwind sailing, and that's really helped a lot, at least until we actually ripped it a little bit on the way back from Morgan's Bluff to Bimini. So that's being repaired down in Fort Lauderdale right now. And we are actually in the process of talking with a couple sailmakers about having a Code Zero made. I find that the Solent, even though it's really, really convenient, and you can fly it in upwards of 26 knots apparent with a full main, is a little too small for lighter to medium winds. So I'm really looking to get a Code Zero that will allow us to fly in upwards of 15 to 19 knots. Nautatech publishes a reefing schedule, and in it they have a full main and a Code Zero 75 square meter Code Zero, and you can fly it in upwards of 19 knots. And I've been told that actually is pretty decent. There's a lot of cruising catamarans that you have to start reefing down far earlier than that, 15 knots, for example, or a little less. I want to thank you for the privilege of your time for watching this video. It's a lot of fun putting these together, and it's even funner to know that some people actually get something out of it. If you happen to be a subscriber to Wile 1 Sailing, I want to thank you so much for sticking with us. If you are not a subscriber and you happen to like this video, hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go, and we would really appreciate it. It means a lot to us. Thanks a ton, and hope to see you out on the water. And wow, the lines are rigged, and that's fuck. Could I? I think I'd try. It doesn't matter. I'm not. So, with a couple. And that's obviously why you are looking, passage, for example, find that we were able to make decent headway on it. Shit.